Anyway, so Pankaj, please entertain us about Ram Swarup and the struggle against communism.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes.
If I am not audible, if the connection breaks, please tell me so I'll switch off the video and let the audio continue.
Yeah.
If this happens in between. So, first of all, thank you, sir Conrad Asji, for inviting me in this for this lecture. I thank India Facts for this very important series. Uh, to write or speak about Sri Ram Sarup Ji is actually an audacity, particularly for someone like me. I became aware of Sri Ram Sarup Ji and his writing in 2001 when my guru introduced me to him. Sri Ram Sarup Ji had already passed away then. The first book of his which I ever got to read, and which people generally get to read, the first book which introduces Ram Sarup Ji to people, was The Hindu View of Christianity in Islam, arguably his most popular work besides Understanding Islam Through Hadith. Back then, and I had a habit of highlighting the most important or unforgettable lines in any book that I read. I started this book, and midway I realized that I was actually painting the whole book. There was not a word which was misplaced, not a single line which could be edited out of the text. Not only the text was crisp, it was also literary, even about a subject so academic and so technical. The bar was set high, and reading his first book, I thought that it must be his best. But as I discovered other works of his, like Meditations, Yoga, Thoughts, and Religion, I realized he is one of the very best. His writing is like Updesh, delivered in a gentle tone and in the softest of words. It cleanses you, it heals you. He had the knack of talking about the harshest of topics in the calmest of tones. He never evaded even the most burning issues of his time. And yet there was never even a hint of anger in his writing. This is something very hard to achieve. And I have seen very few authors actually pulling it off, but Ram Sarup Ji was like that. This feature of his writing did not evolve over time, but was present from the very beginning. It is not known widely today that he also wrote extensively on communism and the red menace to India and the world. Actually, people know Sitaramji more for writing on communism and the threat that communism poses to India and the world. But some of the first writings of Sri Ram Sarup Ji can be found under the publication house and society called the Society for the Defense of Freedom in Asia. These works show Sri Ram Sarup Ji to be quite prescient in his perception of communism, its methodology, its mechanisms, and its future in India and the world. Ram Sarup Ji was writing at a great disadvantage at that time. At that time, India was head over heels in love with communism under the drunken leadership of Nehru, who was ready to disbelieve his own eyes for the sake of his belief in communism. The World War II had just ended, and the world had lost all desire to fight communism, except in a few circles in the US. It looked as if communism would become unstoppable and would soon take over India, for India was the last great third world country not taken over by the by the communist bloc. The fall of China in 1950 was also very threatening. A few lone writers were writing against communism in the West. Robert Conquest was a prominent name. The great age of Soviet dissidents like Shalamov, Solzhenitsyn, and Kravchenko hadn't yet come. Some of them had just started writing, some of them had just defected to the West, and some of them hadn't even started. Even those who did write the reality about Soviet Union were hounded out of academia and discussion forums. Their voices at best were drowned in the communist propaganda. In this light, the condition of India was even worse, and the canards spread by Nehru and his psycho friends painted a picture of heaven on earth about Soviet Union. It is in these adverse circumstances that Sri Ram Sarup Ji wrote these penetrating books about communism. He started writing about the Red Menace as early as 1955. It is, when you consider the date, it is almost unthinkable. In a tract titled Where Are They? Communists Under Communism, he talks about the Great Purge of 1937-38 in Soviet Union and other communist countries, in which Stalin managed to kill most of the old guard of the Bolshevik Communist Party on trumped up charges and mock trials. These trials were reported in the West faithfully by the communist press, though not many believed in this propaganda as the charade was too much. But there were hardly any first hand witnesses who could tell the tale of exactly what had happened. The dominant sense about the whole macabre thing was a sense of bewilderment at best. In, in that era, Sri Ram Sarup Ji, writing as early as 1955, was very clear about the agenda the methodology, the strategy of communism. And this is how he describes the communists. I'll quote: "The communist strategy is simple. It consists in serial liquidation of enemies, constituted of all the non-communist opposition and the non-proletarian sector of population. Blackmail, vilification, character assassination is the characteristic methods used to achieve this end. Opponents are labeled, split off, and played against one another. Communists fight the conservatives to the last socialists. Then the socialists themselves are divided and different splinters are picked off one by one. At the end, communists clamp down and put the lid on them all. Thus, after the victims have sufficiently weakened themselves in a struggle which is beyond their strength, to use Lenin's phrase, communists come at the top. Once the party is in power, the intra-party struggle becomes more acute at any rate. It becomes more visible and open because it takes on a physical form. Physical liquidation takes the place of the older methods of elimination when democracy prevailed." This is from Where Are They? In this tract, he explains how communism is an ideology so ruthless that except the supreme leader, no one is safe. It is not only the anti-communists who are killed, it is not only the other types of socialists who are killed, but members of the ruling party, members of the Bolshevik party itself were not safe from the totalitarian terror of Comrade Stalin. This was the norm, far from being an exception. And Sri Ram Swarupji shows that this in the tract by giving a long list of various prominent communists killed by communists themselves in not just Soviet Union, but most other communist countries of Europe. From the very beginning, Sri Ram Swarupji was very clear that the only weapon against communism is truth. He talks of creating a truth fund and exposing the methods and propaganda of communism to general public. Stressing on spreading truth does not mean that Sri Ram Swarupji was impractical about means of fighting powerful enemies. In a very surprising but refreshing tract written in 1955, Gandhism and Communism, Principles and Technique, Sri Ram Swarup talks about the definitions, theories, and practices of the two isms most fashionable in the India of 1950s. Sri Ram Swarupji shows great respect to Gandhi in general in this tract, but he is acutely aware of how Nehruvians and many communists were using to exploit the public sentiment that the word Gandhism could generate and use it in the service of communism. Sri Ram Swarupji sets about dispelling the notions about what Gandhism is and what it is not. Most prominently, he tells us that Gandhism cannot be equated to any form of Marxism and Stalinism, something which the socialists of those days were very fond of claiming. He tells us that divinity, religiosity, and God is at the very center of any Gandhian thought, and this is pure anathema to communism or socialism. He also tells us not to get bogged in the fine distinctions between the words like socialist, communist, leftist, Leninist, Marxist, and gives us the practical advice that the umbrella they use is one, and to any proponent of Hindu Dharma, any follower of Hindu Dharma, all of these systems, if they are different, to us, they actually mean the same. He exposes the hypocrisy of those intellectuals who appealed in the name of Gandhism while opposing capitalism and blind industrialization, but ignored him completely while praising Soviet Union or other communist countries. In this tract, he debunks the hypocrisy of those closet socialists who go by the name of Gandhians. But a very important point which one realizes upon reading this tract is that instead of discarding Gandhism in total, Sri Ram Swarupji uses it as a dike for criticizing the great evils of his time. And he considered communism to be the greatest evil of his time. So Gandhism was something that he could use against the greatest evil of his time, and he did. So it also shows us his pragmatic mind. He starts another such tract written in 1954 with these words. Today we face a grave problem. Look at the precise words of Sri Ram Swarupji. I quote, "Today we face a grave problem, the problem of a communist threat to our national freedom and cultural heritage, to the human spirit and mind themselves. The threat is not local, but universal, not to India alone, but to humanity and the world over, not only to the institutions of private property and individual initiative, but to the democratic values of liberty and civil rights, but to the deeper values and urges of mankind." I think I have not read any other tract which sums up this thread so beautifully in so few words, which was actually characteristic of Sri Ram Swarupji. In this tract too, he discusses how Gandhism is being distorted and misappropriated by socialists of all hues. But he also takes care to expose the untenable propositions in Gandhism. In very soft words, which was again customary, he says that Gandhism is not a system. but a personality cult. And without the personality, it will not work. He also warns against being neutral in the war between capitalism and communism. Fully knowing the limitations of the former, Sri Ram Sarupji nevertheless saw communism as pure evil and said that being neutral in such an important fight is nothing short of supporting evil. And every Hindu should oppose communism with all the might he can. He believed that India had a great role to play in world affairs and it should present a spiritual point of view in this war of worldviews and ideology. But Sri Ram Sarup never fails from informing us more and more about the true nature of communism. He tells us that the evidence, the violence in communism is not incidental but institutional, employed for a very specific goal. Because we often make this mistake that a certain system, we often claim that this may be just an exaggeration of the principle, but he negates it here. He says that it was not some practice of communism that went out of hand and became violent. The very principle, the very ideology is wrong, evil, or violent at the first place. I quote once again, communist violence is not impulsive, it is organic, inherent, cultivated, calculated, and planned. After it has captured power, it is sustained and institutionalized. Throughout its history, it is not only externally directed, but also internally perfected. It operates not only through the world's most massive armed strength, it also maintains a powerful fifth column throughout the world. It utilizes ideology, exploits and sharpens conflicts among its victims, sells confusion and distrust, and morally blackens its opponents. Communist violence is gross as well as subtle, open as well as hidden. It is a total whole time thing. He says this in Gandhism and Communism once again. So once again, a very, very good summary of the tactics of the communists. And if we see the contemporary condition of India today, the same conditions prevail, the same enemies, they use the same tricks. Of course, communism, the communist states, most of them are gone, but the machinery is in place. And in order to break Hinduism, they are still employing the same methods, which can very well be seen in this paragraph that I just quoted. Another confusion prevailing among those times in India was that as communism espoused atheism, and Indian Darshan also supported some systems which were called by some as atheists in modern times. So communism should actually be acceptable to Indian society. This was actually something that the socialists of those times claimed sometimes. Ram Sarup squarely dismisses these notions and tells us that atheism of communism is of an entirely different kind. Once again, I quote, but the new communist atheism is different. It is a state creed, politically organized, psychologically manipulated, and enforced with the help of the police. It involves roaring publishing business, millions of trained agitators, organization of social censor and praise, reward and punishment, large scale indoctrination, complete suppression of any rival point of view. The high pressured publicity of which the present technical civilization is capable is pushed in the service of inculcating atheism. Education, press, radio, film all serve the same purpose. In the present day Russia, a certain amount of piety and ritualism is allowed as a concession to world opinion among persons and groups who may choose to remain in the backwaters of life. But any living manifestation of divine life is at once reported to the police and destroyed physically. So this is a very important strain that we see. We still see that a very violent sort of atheism is pushed on Hindus still in 21st century. And we can see actually Ram Sarup as someone as prescient to be dictating what would happen when these all of this rights activism and all of these different hues of liberalism are working against Hindu society or Sanatan Dharma today. Once again, drawing attention to his pragmatism, taking help of the dominant thought of his times, he tries to fight communism, the greatest menace of his time. In Foundations of Maoism, a longer work published in 1966, Sri Ram Sarup discusses the Chinese threat to India under the deadly ideology of communism. At that early stage, Sri Ram Sarup advocated creating a zone of buffer states all around India to save it from Chinese advances. That we fail to listen to his advice is evident today when China is at all of our gates on all sides. In this tract, he analyzes the delusions of Indian Maoists and Marxists who supported everything that their comrades did in China. This was a phrase, new democracy. Ram this new democracy is democracy only in the name. It is actually a tool of communism, and there is nothing go into detail. But in this track, he analyzes the character of Maoism, Chinese Communist Party, and communism in general, that it is worthy of reading even now in 2020. When the archives have opened in Moscow, and a lot of communist methodology in hindsight now seems very clear to the scholars working now. But to someone writing in 1966 in India, with all the disadvantage of very working Soviet Union communist international machinery, this seems very, very surprising. Indian Maoists and Marxists were also in raptures over the new economy of China. The new economy was nothing confiscation of private property by the ruling Communist Party of China. Sri Ram Sarupji analyzes it and makes it very clear. Also busts the myth that China under Maoism had created food surplus. Needless to say, all of these are the fodder of Indian Maoists and communists. He once again exposes the new culture of Maoist China, where individuals are forced to confess to their anti-communist thought crimes and wrong ways of thinking in front of people. It was a common strategy of communists in Soviet Union as well as China to make individuals confess for ideological crimes like thinking in a capitalist way. The drive was in China as change brain campaign. It was a psychological and sociological tool that Maoists deployed with ferocity. Another important point that Sri Ramsarupji does not miss is the inveterate hostility of Maoists against the Confucian ethics. This is a very important point. It was the Confucian ethics which is the daily life of the Chinese. It governed their rituals, customs, and ways of thinking and looking at the world. Sharp enough to realize that if communism had to take root in China, in a traditional community, culture, civilization like China, Confucian ethics had to be rooted out. Sri Ram Sarupji points this out very prominently. He tells us how communism is inherently and ideologically at odds with any indigenous and custom of ethics and morality. Maoism was not at good terms with spirituals like Taoism either. Sri Ram Sarupji quips in a very short sentence, Maoism is fast replaceable. So in India too, we see this reflected. This is the reason that communism is against the Dharma Shastras of Hindus. The same reason that they oppose Confucian, because they know that this is what governs the daily life of a Hindu. And if that is destroyed, he will be ready for harvest by any predatory ideology like Christianity. Not neglecting the menace that Maoist China posed to India's sovereignty and national integrity, Sri Ram Sarupji also exposes Nehruvian policy in India of serving Chinese needs first, ignoring even India's interest. He says how when Tibet was invaded, Nehru and his cabal silenced the sane voices of Sri S.P. Mukherjee, Sri M.R. Masani, and various others. He of China by indicating what it did to the native culture and people of not only Tibet, but also Xinjiang. It is an evil force bent at human servitude. He does not shy away from saying that in the language of the Gita, Maoism is an Asuric force. He warns us that China is pumping money in India for funding media persons and academicians to lobby for China in Indian political, academic, and media space. Facing such a concerted attack against India's society, polity, and culture, we need to put up the best defense that we can. But finally, he said that fighting the Chinese menace militarily won't be enough. Like he has always been saying, until the very ideology of communism is defeated, it can't really be defeated. He made it clear that Maoism, like Leninism or Stalinism, was a two-pronged attack. While they attack you militarily from outside, while trying to erode the indigenous institutions from the inside by sponsoring spies and propagandists. Expanding on Leninism and Stalinism, he tells us that they need professional revolutionaries because it is an artificial system which no public would ever support on its own. He says that political and economic ways are not sufficient ways to fight Maoism and Leninism. One needs to fight the communist menace at the level of ideology. It has to be fought ideologically, doctrinally, and organizationally. Decades after his advice, we still fail to listen to him very properly, and we see the result. He did not miss the mass stirrings that were happening in West Bengal. Explaining the strategies and actions of the Communist Party in Bengal, he described the situation of riots there and how the police was helpless fodder against the miscreants. His descriptions have a very uncanny similarity to the CAA riots that took place recently in Delhi and India and all over India. we seem to be repeating the same mistakes again and again, and it is painful. It makes me glad and also painful to see that Sri Ram Sarupji, saints like Sri Ram Sarupji and Sitaramji have been warning us about these things. This was written in 1966 and other tracks were written in 1955. They have been warning us for the last 65 years and continuously menace ideologically, not just militarily. Star over West Bengal. He warns of the intimidating tactics of communists and how they gradually force individuals into ideological submission. At last, I would like to quote a few lines by him, warning us about communism in once again very, very crisp words. Of monogamy. The whole spiritual evolution of man is at stake. Fashionable pacifism, which is blind to this fact, must be rejected. And with this, he warns us that this menace has to be fought at a much, much deeper level. Institutionally, but also spiritually. So, communism is dead in Soviet Union. It is still alive as a mercenary network of institutions, selling their services to any bidder who is invested in anti-Hinduism and the destruction of Hindu culture and civilization. There is still time to heed his advice and fight the civilization enemies of India and Sanatan Dharma, like Islam and Christianity, ideologically and institutionally. But only if we pay enough heed to his words. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sir Els, for giving me this opportunity to speak in this event. When I started reading Ram Sarup Ji, I'd never thought I would be fortunate enough to speak at an event like this. The only emotion that I have now is that of gratitude for the understanding that Sri Ram Sarup
Hello?
Hello.
Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Pankaj ji. This is a very important topic, so I suppose there will be objections or disagreements or simply questions. Anyone? In that case, I have a few questions.
Yes, please.
Were there any disagreements between Ram Swarup and other anti-communists in India? And in fact, this preceding question is, what anti-communist activity was there in India?
As far as I am aware, sir, there was not much activity until Voice of India came around. There was some political activity, yes, but some political opposition to communism, but not just like Ram Sarup Ji. That's why you see, when you feel his books on communism, when you read his tracts on communism, you feel that he's repeating again and again that you have to fight this ideologically, that not just politically at the level of politics. But there were very few before Voice of India came, before people like you, Arun Shourie, and Ram Sarup Ji himself and Sitaram Ji came. There were very few. Shankar Still, there are very few people who they fail to see the Soviet Union fell. And so we don't need to worry about that. But they fail to see that the current rights activism, various hues, they ride on some of the same concepts, some of the same principles. And so there are still very few people who are willing to fight ideologically this menace. And that's why that see that Hindu individuals and parties try to win elections. And that is necessary. Yes, I recognize that is very, very important. But after winning elections, they think their job is done and the communist menace is gone. But Ram Sarup Ji, even while there was absolutely no hope of any Hindu party at the center, seemingly Hindu party at the center, even then he was again and again calling us to fight it ideologically and organizationally. and spiritually. I think very few people who have done that.
Well, as far as I can see from his book titles, he was very active until the end of the 50s. What happened after that, do you know? I mean, this is just a factual question, but you know, when going through his life's work, you see, I find a certain vacuum in the 10 years before 1968.
To
So,
supplement this question, I just want to know if there was anything post perestroika, glasnost, and collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s. Did there was
tell me a
any
few words. I'll try to answer.
so kind of a writing or
Hello.
yes?
Yes,
Yes, Hari.
we can hear
Please.
you.
I'm saying when there was a collapse, he passed away in 98. So there was a collapse of the Soviet Union in the 90s itself, and before that we had the
Yeah.
perestroika and glasnost and all that. So were
Yeah.
there any writings after observing how Soviet Union collapsed?
Writings of Ram Sarupji, are you specifically
Yes,
asking?
yes, on communism.
No, after actually he focused on communism in the earliest phases of his writing. Later on, I guess he passed on the baton to Sita Ramji because Sita Ramji was continuously writing on communism. Other authors were also remarking on that. But all of his writings on communism are some of his earliest, but not in his later phase when he focused very more on Islam, Christianity, and also the spiritual aspects. The spiritual way we could put an opposition to or purpose to Islam and Christianity. So no later writings on communism, not that I'm aware of.
All right.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
Yeah. Yeah, this is Jagannathan. May I ask a question?
Yes, please. Please.
Basically, did Ram Sarojji draw any kind of ideological linkages from the Abrahamic monotheisms, Nazism, Stalinism, communism, and that there is some kind of a straight line that connects these absolutisms, which tend to draw on the same basic idea?
Yeah, he does actually, except Nazism, which I guess he mentions at a few places, but he doesn't focus much on that. But he has mentioned all of these other ideologies, and in his later works, he was more focused on drawing comparisons, like you say, on all of these absolutist ideologies and commenting on them totally instead of focusing on one subject. That's why when I first came about his tracks on communism, I was actually very surprised that he had focused very specifically on communism, and his writing is as refined as pleasurable to read even in those early years. So that's why I have the sense that I get from those early tracks, which I have also written in this paper, is that he was very practical in the sense that he always identified what was the biggest menace to Hindu society at that time, and he also did not shy away from using any methodology in order to counter that, in order to counter the threat to Hindu society. So the basic thought which comes in his writing is that we have to put up a very constant vigilance and fight to whatever threat that Hindu society faces, Hindu Sanatan culture and society faces.
Yeah, one more thing, that all these ideologies have a millenarian kind of concept where there is some kind of defined end to the world and judgment day and other things and a certain kind of things. But like, did he prescribe how exactly? See, in a sense, Hinduism is a bit of an outlier in the sense that all the great universalisms that came from the desert cults and of course the Marxist ones that followed actually have spread all over the world. They have turned out to be power cults, and because once you have the power, you can do anything. But how does one single counter ideology like Hinduism really counter so many collective universalism, which basically share the same idea of how to aggregate power and decimate your enemies?
Actually, he mentions this at various places, that all of these absolutist ideologies that you mentioned, they are in nature just like you say, they are in nature same. They are
Yeah.
all just apart from a few differences through peripheral differences, they are all exactly at many places that Sanatan Dharma is for a reason called inherent, and he very much believed that it will be from India that a very good opposition to all of these absolutist cults and millennial and totalitarian cults will arise because of our spiritual bhumi, because of our spiritual foundation. And got the vantage point of
Right.
them. And he believed
Right.
actually, maybe you have asked very good questions. Maybe I'll try to identify where he has said that in all of his works exactly. But I remember reading him that if you manage to come up with a good response against one of are just same ideologies under different names.
Right.
Right.
Another question,
Yes, sir.
uh,
Please.
also about facts. What institutional framework against communism did Ram Sarup help create? I'm conveying the question. In fact, I know the answer, namely the Democratic Research Service had been set up by Sardar Patel in 1948, and that was specifically to study the threat of communism. And so it was led by Minu Masani, a Parsi businessman, who had
I'm
been one
sorry.
of the founders of the Congress Socialist Party, along with Subhash Bose and others, in 1934. But he too, like Ram Sarup, had turned away from the left. And then Ram Sarup was his secretary, and he wrote a history of the Communist Party of India. And that text was then taken by Masani and published in his own name, not mentioning Ram Sarup. So there was a lot
Yeah.
of bad blood between them. And Ram Sarup then left the Democratic Research Service and joined Sitaram Goel in Calcutta, who had started the Society for the Defense of Freedom in Asia. Then it seems there was a third anti-communist think tank. One of the people who worked there was Girilal Jain, the later editor of the Times of India.
Times of
But
India.
that fell out of favor because it turned out that it was in fact an outfit operated by the CIA. And that's all that I know of anti-communist institutions in India. I don't think there were any more. Oh yeah, and there was of course the Swatantra Party, which was also led by this Minu Masani. It was started by Raja Gopalachari, the freedom struggle leader. And so it was pro-Western. Unlike the Jansang was nationalistic, and so they had a bit of an attitude of, a plague on both your houses. Both Russia and America are threats to India. It is against that position that Ram Sarup reacted when he said, we cannot be neutral in this. You see, there is a difference in quality between the West and the Soviet Union. So that party became, in fact, it's that party for which Sitaram Goel stood as a candidate from Khajuraho in the Lok Sabha elections of 1957. But the party became big in the 1960s in an alliance with the Jansang. But then when under the emergency, it merged into the new Janata Party, and then it disappeared and never came back.
Yes. So if I get your question correctly, sir, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think we still have a good organizational opposition to communism. And the worst part is that after the fall of Soviet Union, we think we have become complacent. We have started thinking that it is no longer a menace. I've actually heard very important leaders saying that what about communism? It fell in 1989 and 1990. It has disappeared. And look at us, we are everywhere. We are ruling all over India. So I guess it is more disturbing because the rights activism that is now plaguing us, and that will become very, very huge in the coming years and decades, because they are throwing one after other these ideas about which Hindus are just groping for any response. We do not have any active, we do not have any active response according to which we are actually trying to put up a Hindu paksh of what we think on democracy, what we think on freedom of absolute freedom of expression, or freedom of speech, or universal equality. We haven't tried to develop any critic of that, and that's why I guess despite all of the political advances, uh, there are a lot of good signs too, yes, but I don't think they are enough. So I think that's why the writings of Ram Sarup ji, these early writings of Ram Sarup ji are even more important. When I started reading his tracts on West Bengal, it actually it has a very uncanny resemblance to what is happening today in India, in Delhi, when CA was passed, when Shaheen Bagh was happening. It has a very, very uncanny resemblance. So we would do well if we pay heed to his words. Yes, thank you, sir.
Right, thank you.
Madhuji, you are trying to say something. Yes.
Yeah, thank you
Namaste.
very much, Pankaj, for a very terse and very well-structured presentation on Ram Sarup's views. I really enjoyed it. Now, what I would like to, in response to your comment about how in India, on the one hand, we don't have any organized platform for combating communist ideology. If anything, it has gotten strengthened. It's become part of mainstream Sarkari thinking. But it's also, and India is one of the few places where the left still carries disproportionate influence in public domain. But you see, the irony of it all is this, that this influence is coming thanks to patronage from Western funding agencies. The Ford Foundations and the Rockefellers, and now I'm sure even the Open Society of George Soros, so each one of them will do anything to promote communists, Maoists, the kind of people that they don't want to see in their own country are the ones that they promote here. And Western universities, you can't get a job if you don't have recommendation, good character certificates from your commie professors. So until very recently, if you remember, on television, till very recently, I had to say it again and again, that all the human rights discourse was dominated by Maoists. And I would tell the anchors, including Arnab Goswami, do you realize that Maoists are lecturing us on human rights? That people who claim to be commies are lectured, and then they're foreign funded. They get crores of rupees from the West, but they want closed door economy in India. So foreign money is good if it comes into their begging bowls, but foreign money as investment is anathema. So they've actually distorted Indian politics, and the disproportionate influence that they have, I think, is mainly because of the patronage of Western universities, also church-funded organizations. Almost all of the church-funded NGOs are almost all commies. And we know wherever the church is strong, that is where Maoists are strong. So it's a curious coming together of disruptive forces. They may be ideologically at war with each other elsewhere, but in India, they're all together, including Islamists. And we know very well that the Communist Party of India has always thrived on the strength of Muslim intellectuals.
Yes.
Through IPTA, for example, the Indian People's Theatre Association, which came then later to dominate Bollywood. All their bigwigs, the big poets, went from IPTA to Bollywood and became not just songwriters, script writers, film directors. So Islamists, Christian missionaries, Maoists, all funded by Western universities and Western donor agencies, all in the name of liberalism. Thank you very much.
Yes, Madhuji, actually our enemies are very clever. They know that they are fighting a geopolitical war. They know that they are fighting a religious war. And individuals have been stupid in history again and again. But I think India is the only country in modern times, modern Indian Republic, which has institutionalized idiocy and made it its official foreign policy. So only we believe in platitudes, which our enemies throw at us. They know how to organize it. They know that now communism is.
Right. Okay.
We lost you.
Masters. Now all of these people are paying them, and that's what they are doing. So only we.
Lost you.
Are you there, Pankaj?
Yes, I am, sir.
Okay. Okay, if we are done with this subject,